Okay. It says live here.
Looks good to me.
I think we can start. All right. Hello, everyone. It's Blockchain Professionals 2020, our last live stream for 20. Yep. I'm just having feedback on my ear. I'm going to go and make sure that is off. Okay, there's always a little problem. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to start again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blockchain Professionals 2020. It's our last live stream for this year. I'm here with Paul Hauner from Sigma Prime. And before I introduce Paul, I'm just going to say thank you to our friends at Edge Wallet for their sponsorship and for supporting our meetup every month of the year. We love their wallet. We love their work. They're very security friendly, and you can use Ethereum. You can use their wallet for your Ethereum tokens. Yay! Here we go. We're chatting to Paul Hauner today. He is director of Sigma Prime, a Sydney-based security consultancy. They have founded and are maintaining Lighthouse, the open source implementation of Ethereum 2, which is written in Rust. And they are heavily involved in the Ethereum 2 engineering and research as well. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Adriana. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully next year we can do this in person again.
Yeah, it sounds good. Sorry about the birds on my end. They just started as we started.
Oh, that's all right. It's that time of the evening. So last week was a great week for you guys. Tell us a little bit about, what happened at Go Time.
Yeah, it was a really big week actually. It's about 2.5 years, I think, of like engineering and team building on our end. So last Tuesday at 11 p.m. Sydney time was F2 Beacon Chain Genesis. So that means that it's the phase 0 of F2. Maybe we can get into the phases later. So the phase 0, which is the proof of stake chain, it launched at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. So we went from having no beacon chain, no concept of F2 in the world running, to having the chain, the canonical chain with I think about $500 million Australian of stake either locked into it or committed to being locked into it. To having that running and having all those validators agreeing on blocks and producing a chain. So it was really exciting for us. It's always a little bit concerning, especially with huge distributed networks, as to how everything is going to go, because you don't control every server. All you control is a bit of software that someone else starts. So we've done a lot of test runs before, so we were quite confident in our software. But when it comes to users and software, they're both very unpredictable. So we were worried that things were going to go bad, but they didn't. They went really well. Things have gone super smoothly. We're seeing like 99% of validators online and working. So yeah, it was a great event. I'm so glad that both that it went well and also that it's now in the past. I don't have to be concerned about it anymore.
Exactly. So let's unpack this a little bit for the not so advanced people watching. What is the difference between Ethereum 1 and Ethereum 2?
Oh yeah, so good question. So Ethereum 1 and Ethereum 2 are two separate chains for the time being. So Ethereum 1 is, I think probably most people in the show are familiar with Ethereum 1. It has smart contracts and we've been dealing with it since 2015. Ethereum has always had an intention to move to proof of stake and also sharding. So proof of stake means we reduce energy consumption from miners, and sharding means we can process multiple transactions at once and get higher throughput. So that's always been in the Ethereum's roadmap, and Ethereum 2 is basically the path that Ethereum has taken to achieve those two things. So what they've said is that we're going to have Ethereum 1 and it continues to run. So Ethereum 1 really, in all of this and all of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment, Ethereum 1 doesn't even really know I exist or care that F2 exists. It's still chugging along. And then Ethereum 2 is this kind of parallel upgrade process. So we're kind of starting to build it out. And then as we develop along the Ethereum 2 roadmap, we'll eventually start to merge Ethereum 1 into it. Probably a pretty good analogy is like perhaps having an old, 2-lane highway that you had that served you really well. And then you start building, a big 8-lane superhighway next to it. So for a while, while it's being built, the big 8-lane highway is just being built. You can't really use it. And then the other road still continues to exist. And then at some point in time, we're going to kind of merge the two together, create on-ramps and off-ramps, and people will stop using the old one. Yeah.
So does that mean that everything that was working on Ethereum 1 is still there and only new things are being built on Ethereum 2?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the interesting thing about Ethereum 2 is that no one's really building anything on at the moment. So really important thing, there was a bit of a, just before F2 launched, there was a bit of a Twitter fight, I guess, for lack of a better word, about the terminology that people should use when it comes to F2. So I think there were some people saying, F2 is launched, and then there were people saying, no, this is incorrect. F2 is not launched. Phase 0 of F2 has launched. So maybe this is a good time to get into the phases of F2. So F2 is split into 2 phases at the moment, phase 0, phase 1. So phase 0 is building basically the core proof of stake infrastructure of Ethereum. So it's creating the beacon chain, which is this kind of central coordination chain where we don't actually have, like transfers between people who are buying and selling coffees or widgets or whatever. We don't have smart contracts or anything like that on the beacon chain. All we have on the beacon chain is just pure management of validators and tracking whether they're performing well, or they're faulty, what they're agreeing on, and then finalizing and building a chain out of what they produce. So the roadmap for Ethereum 2 is produce phase 0. So we nail proof of stake. We get our validators running. Everyone knows how to run their software. We're confident in the chain. And then phase 1 is where we bring execution into F2. So that's when we start to have like smart contracts, transactions, and that's when users can actually start to build dApps on it. So at the moment,
phase 0.
Sorry
to interrupt you. Phase 0, in a sense, is you're building the validators, but they're not validating anything except maybe some test transactions. And then the next phase is let's start building stuff on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. So what does happen now is that the validators are rewarded for performing their duties, and they are getting rewarded by a new ETH that is being issued. So the issuance model of Ethereum has changed, but the actual user functionality hasn't changed.
So is ETH being issued on both Ethereum 1 and 2 at the moment?
It is. So Ethereum 1 is traveling along as it normally does with existing miner rewards, inflating at some rate to do with that. Then F2 is, let me rephrase this. So the idea behind Ethereum 2 is to never split the F asset. So we really want to avoid, well, not we, I guess I'm an engineer, so I don't have a huge opinion about these type of things, but I agree with it. And this is kind of the researchers, Ethereum Foundation's perspective on it, is that they don't want to create like an F1 and an F2 token. They want these 2 tokens to be unified. So the idea was that when you want to become a validator on F2, you have to burn your F1 ETH, you put it into the deposit contract, and then it kind of pops up over on F2. As far as F1 is concerned, in its own little isolated world, you've just locked it in a smart contract and it's never going to see it again. But then if we kind of zoom out and take a larger, more human perspective of it, we say that the ETH has been burnt in F1 and it's appeared in F2. And then F2 is running alongside of it and people are producing blocks, and then there's issuance being created in F2, but there's not actually a bridge back to F1 yet. So the money that's in F2 is really locked in there until phase 1 is completed and we have execution, we have transactions between the two. Yeah, so it's, I guess, like from a highly technical perspective, they're separate, but I think in the long term, it really makes sense to consider them as one.
All right, so how does staking work?
So that's a good question. So the concept of staking is, so it's a replacement for proof of work. So what proof of work is ultimately is trying to filter out good blocks from bad blocks. Anyone on the internet can produce a bunch of blocks, and we can have, you know, people producing like terabytes of blocks per second, and we could never sort through them, and it'd be all rubbish. So proof of work is kind of this scheme where we say, you know, if you can put some energy, if you can put some resources behind a block and publish it to me, then I can, you know, just take those ones where people have put some money, some effort, something behind it. And I can only consider those blocks, and then that reduces the scope of blocks that the network needs to consider. This is like a very hand-wavy explanation, and it works from my perspective. Other people have different views. So that was the idea of proof of work, and then the idea of proof of stake was that, you know, perhaps instead of just now that we already have cryptocurrencies, they're kind of respected as a store of value. Perhaps we can, instead of applying, you know, computational power energy to blocks to indicate that you spent that they should be valuable and considered, what we can do is basically put some cryptocurrency behind it and say, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to join a proof of stake protocol, and I'm going to put 32F. I think I don't know what that's worth these days, maybe like 15, 20 grand or something like that, Australian. I'm going to put my money on the line. And then I'm going to be a part of this protocol, and I'll produce blocks. I'll vote on other people's blocks. And if I fail to do those duties, then the protocol can deduct some of my money from me. And if I happen to do something that's provably incorrect or invalid, then you can just remove a whole chunk of that F and kick me out of the system. So that's the fundamentals of proof of stake. The idea of, like, you know, putting some money on the line, saying I'm a part of the network, and if I don't do my duties, then I'm going to get penalized or slashed, we call it, when someone proves a provably invalid message. So that's what proof of stake is. I can move on to what a proof of stake validator does in Ethereum, unless you have a question.
Yes.
All right. So
absolutely.
I said before that you're doing duties. So it's important to understand what this is. So let's go from like a super high level thing. So say I want to be a validator. What I need to do is I need to come up with 32F, buy it from exchange, mine it, do whatever. And then I need to get myself a server. So that might be just, you know, like a Raspberry Pi at home. It might be like some old computer I have lying around, or it might be like a cloud server, or it might be like a whole infrastructure I've set up for staking as a service with, like, you know, lots of servers and firewalls and stuff. But fundamentally, I need my 32F, and I need a computer on the internet. Then what I do is I deposit my 32F on the F1 chain, gets locked in the smart contract. Then I suddenly appear as a validator on F2, where so what I did actually. So let me skip back. What I would do is I have my 32F. I generate public and private key pair for Ethereum 2. The BLS is the cryptography used. So I generate that public key pair, and then I say to the deposit contract, here's my F, here's my keys. And then what happens is F2 will kind of pick that up, and then it'll go, okay, you know, this person deposited, now here's their keys. Their public key indicates, you know, that they're a validator. And then what I need to do is load the secret key of that public key into my server, point it at the internet, and then run an F2 client. So Lighthouse is the one that I work on. So we have a Validator Client, we call it. This is a piece of software you run, and then it connects to the internet and does all your validator duties. I think I've maybe gone a little bit into too detail for my overview.
That's okay.
But yeah, so basically you need to get 32F and a server. You run the server, and the server does all of your validating duties jobs. And you just need to make sure that server stays up, it stays connected to the internet, and like it stays online. So basically, from a super high level perspective, a validator is just someone that had 32F, locked it up, and now they run a server that contributes to the network. A bit like in Bitcoin, it's like if you got paid to run a full node in a way.
And if it's one person that owns the 32F or a group of people, that makes no difference, because all it matters is it's in the contract or the wallet. What's the proper term for this?
Well, the deposit contract is where you put your F.
Okay. Yeah, and right. You have to run the software, and that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So like you said, that 32F, it might be like a group of people all teamed together. It might be one person. One person might have 10,000 times 32F individual validators. So we don't exactly, it's not like we don't have an identity. Obviously, there's no KYC, so it's not one person, one validator. Yeah, it's 32F, one validator.
So is that the equivalent of having lots of computers running proof of work, having a lot of validator nodes?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's similar in the way that it involves running computers, but the compute requirements are vastly different. So proof of work is it ends up as a game to see who can consume, who can basically who can build the fastest proof of work miners, and then once that's established, then who can get the most energy the cheapest to become the most powerful in the game, so to speak. Then whereas and so this using a lot of energy results in, you know, Bitcoin has kind of like nation state level energy consumption. So that using of energy is very core to it. Whereas in proof of stake, you don't really use any more energy than is required just to communicate on the network and just like basically roughly computer program types of things. So I guess one way to put it is that proof of work, like on a huge, like for Ethereum, proof of stake has swapped Ethereum from using a nation state worth of energy into a corporation's worth of energy. So the modern or the F2 clients like Lighthouse or Prismatic or the other ones, they use just as much power as like Discord or some chat thing. It's just trying to be as efficient as it can, but there's no game to consume electricity there.
You mentioned Prismatic, not the Prismatic I work for with a K in
Labs.
Australia, but Prismatic Labs with a C. Where are they based?
I think they're generally American, but they're pretty global as well. I think the founders are in the US.
So okay, so there's them. Which other teams are there, and what's the difference between your implementations?
Oh, that's a good question. So there's at one stage there was, I think, 7 or maybe even 8 F2 implementations running for the finish line. But as of Genesis, which is last week, we had 4 implementations. So we had Nimbus, which is by the Status team. They did Status IM. So they're writing one in the NIM programming language. They're aiming to be very low resource consumption so that they can run on like routers and phones and things like this. They're also, NIM is a fairly new programming language. They're also developing that as they go. So, but they're generally their idea is that, you know, they're gonna be able to run on a phone or an old modem. Then we also, after that, we have the Teku team. So Teku are consensus. And their stack is written in Java. So I believe that they're trying to appeal to enterprise, so companies that may already have a big in-house Java stack, which is very common. And I assume that they're going to support all of the Kafka and, you know, lovely little enterprise integrations that corporations love so much. Then you have Prismatic Labs from the US, not Prismatic from Australia. They have the Prism client. They're written in Go. I think that they're generally looking at being quite user-friendly. They've been really good at engaging with the community. You've probably seen them on Twitter and all these sort of places. So they, do a lot to help with users and community-facing things like this. And then finally, you have Lighthouse, which is our client. We are ultimately a security company. We were before we started Lighthouse. We still are. So we're very focused on the security aspects, and we're also in Rust, and we like optimizing things. So we've also been quite focused on performance. So we've been coming ahead in performance benchmarks quite a lot. So we've also, as well as Lighthouse, Sigma Prime, have also been doing fuzzing on F2. So this is a process, fuzzing. I think Yasik described it once. He said, so it's a process for testing software. And he said, it's like having an infinite amount of children, and then these infinite amount of children ask you an infinite amount of questions. And then what happens is they wait until you have a mental breakdown, and then there's a psychologist there. They take note of it, and then they take you behind, and then they see what made you break down and how you can not break down again from it again. So what we do is we generate random input, just spray it at all of the clients, and we try to see if we can crash them, or if we can get a different result from them. So that's along with Lighthouse, we'll be doing this kind of thing. So I guess our value offering is security, but we like to compete on all fronts, just as everyone else does.
That explanation made me understand some of the tweets that I've seen coming out of your team lately.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, we talk about lots of fuzzing.
All right. So what's gonna happen with the miners from F 1.0? Are they all gonna become validators, or what's
I don't know, actually. It's up to them. So they for the time being, life is normal for them. I'm sure that they have F2 in their vision and they're thinking about it, but for the time being, they can still make blocks, they'll still get the same rewards, it's all fine. I think eventually we won't need miners in Ethereum anymore. That's as much as they've been good to us, and we've even done some mining ourselves. We've decided that proof of stake is where we want to be. So eventually the miners will become obsolete, really, for as far as Ethereum is concerned. Whether they decide to go into staking or not is a good question. It's a little challenging for them because as miners, their goal really was to like their form of capital was machinery and energy. So they were trying to get like big ASICs computational devices, and they were trying to get good access to energy. So they're probably like in the middle of Norway next to a like a hydro plant or something. Who knows? And that doesn't necessarily translate well to being a staker, which just means you just need, I guess, financial capital. You need the money to buy the S, and then you just need servers somewhere. So yeah, it's not really an easy transition between the two. I think some of the mining pools are looking at doing staking because they already have the infrastructure involved of they have the trust of users who want the same thing roughly. And so some people, instead of actually having hardware, they just give money to the mining companies, the pools. So they already have this kind of infrastructure where they have people that give them money, then trust them to run software that makes them money back. So in some ways, their business is not particularly aligned with staking in terms of the hardware. But then on the other hand, in terms of user trust and probably software applications for interfacing with users, they're probably similar. So I suspect we might see some people just drop out. Some miners drop out, jump to another chain. We might see some others. I know there are some miners now actually that are just going to carry their users through into staking.
What is the timeline for this, merging of the old road with a new highway?
That's a very good question, actually. So something about me. So I'm an engineer. So I was involved in F2. So my job was basically to take the F2 specification, shortly after it was written, and then implement it in a programming language and produce a piece of software. So I kind of pick up once the specification is finished, I run through it and then deliver the piece of software. So I'm not always super well wired in with the long-term research plans, but I do keep an eye on them. So I can give a rough estimation, but you could get better, like if you have some resources by the Ethereum Foundation, like Justin Drake or Danny Ryan or anyone like that, I would listen to what they say over me because they might be a little bit smarter. But the roadmap for integrating F1 into F2 has changed a little bit recently. We were previously going to introduce lots of complex sharding and like WASM-based virtual machines and things like this. And then over the past few months, maybe 6 months, there's been a noticeable shift in terms of research, in terms of just kind of trying to wean Ethereum 1 off proof of work, bring it into proof of stake as quickly as we can, and then start producing sharding and lots of these fancy execution environments and stuff. So the current focus of Ethereum is basically like, okay, Beacon Chain's launched, now let's try and get F1 in. When that happens is a good question. There's been a few research proposals. There's nothing that is like a concrete specification on my desk waiting for a response by Monday morning, nothing like that yet. But I think that now that us F2 engineers have launched the Beacon Chain, we're going to start hassling the researchers for more specifications. So if I had to give a rough guess, I would think that something really optimistic would be seeing it happen this year, and then something that's I guess perhaps more realistic, just because I know that I think as a ground rule, if a software developer tells you they'll have it done by some point, it's going to be done by some later point. So perhaps a safer bet would be 2022. But we'll see. Hopefully we can get it 2021. Fingers crossed.
I think 12 months seems really reasonable. We'll see
Yeah.
if that forecast pans out.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Okay, I have some questions on the live chat. Starting with Alistair Hammond. He asks, who are the most promising Australian teams? I assume for Ethereum?
For Ethereum? Well, I guess, I mean, who are the most promising teams? Well, I have to say our team, of course, because I love all the people that work with us, but that's a bit of a non-answer, isn't it? There's the Teku team in Ethereum 2 is actually led by an Australian. So they're, I guess, in some ways an Australian team. So well done to them. It's Adrian Sutton from Brisbane. There's also, I mean, Bocky's doing some great stuff. I always love Bocky's work. God, there's so many people to mention. I mean, Prismatic are great. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of other shops in Australia that are dedicated to Ethereum like we are. Yeah, I'm probably forgetting someone, but I can't give you a great answer on that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think Alistair maybe ask that question at Ethereum Sydney next time.
Yeah, perhaps.
Where
yeah,
all the Ethereum people will be.
Yeah, me.
All right, question 2 from Quimbaya Tech. Maybe they're your neighbors. Can someone become a validator later once F2 is up and running?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very good question. The incentives about when you should become an F2 validator is interesting. So one of the things that I quite like about Ethereum 2 is that they didn't build any FOMO into the protocol purposefully. So we've all seen dodgy ICO launches where they just do the best as they can to create FOMO or hype or anything like this. F2 is not so much like that. It's a lot more reasonable and I guess technically fundamental in that way. So the first thing to understand about F2 is that the issuance, the rewards per validator, is inversely proportional to the number of validators there are. So if there are a very few amount of validators, each validator makes more individually. If there are a lot of validators, each validator makes less individually. So the first incentive for you to become a validator earlier rather than later is to gain to those individual gains at the start will be better. So there's a F2 returns calculator. Actually, I think even launchpad.ethereum.org has a little graph where you can see the returns. So I think maybe at the moment where I should know this, but where maybe it's like 20% or 15%, and maybe in say 6 months or something, we're going to be getting down to 10%. So that's the rough ballpark that we're playing with in terms of rewards. So that is basically the only reason that you would want to get into F2 earlier. There's absolutely no plans or intention to stop onboarding new validators. So you can always join when you want to be, and other people will leave as well too. So yeah, there's really nothing stopping you from becoming a validator whenever you feel comfortable, apart from your desire to get the higher returns whenever you can.
Do you think the amount of S that you have to stake may change in the future, like be higher if there's a lot of validators?
I don't know. I don't think so. I've never heard any talk about it, and there's nothing in the protocol that it will allow for that. So I'd say it's set in stone for now. We could always get a jackhammer and unset it in stone, but set in stone for now.
Okay. All right. Another question. Mr. Cherry Sunburst asks, what's your opinion on why F Research is going for an optimistic roll-up approach over ZK or ZK? Fraud-proof wait times seem far inferior to validity proofs, especially computing more complex than value transfer. For example, no ability for fast withdrawals.
That's a good question. Now, this is where we've this is where I start to my ignorance shows. This is the kind of forward researchy stuff that I unfortunately don't get to spend too much of my time with. Some of the other people at Sigma Prime have been researching roll-ups and doing security reviews, so they're familiar with it. But unfortunately, I can't give you any decent answer, especially after the amount of technical knowledge you expressed in that question. You probably have a better opinion than me, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, so Mr. Cherry Sunburst, perhaps this is a follow-up question that you can send Paul and that he can forward to the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. What about Arbitrium and off-chain labs? They said they can get scalability done by 2021, roughly.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I have a lot of respect for that team. Once again, I don't know the technical details of what they're proposing, but I have a lot of respect for that team. And what 2021, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if someone can come up with a successful, optimistic system by that point. Whether or not we could get it implemented in 4 different programming languages and running is another question. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't doubt what they say, and I have all reason to believe that they could.
Fair enough. Mr. Cherry Sunburst is asking who at Sigma Prime. Would that be Age or Medi?
It's probably a Medi question at this point.
Yep.
Yeah, if they have our Discord, you can find it via the sigp/Lighthouse repository. We have a Discord there. You can reach out on there and just at me in it, and I'll see if I can find someone to answer it. There's also another really good place for these. Yeah, another good place for these questions is there's an R&D Discord. I'm not sure how you find it, but if you Google it, you might be able to find it. That is a really good place to ask questions like that. People will be happy to answer, especially if you're asking them as someone who's technical, who knows what they're talking about. People will be happy to respond to you.
Oh, I'm gonna search for this and I will add the link to the description. I will also ask that you send me the link to your Discord and I'll add to the description as well. So when people are watching this later on, they can always, just quickly jump down and get in touch. All right, so I don't see any community questions for the time being. So back to our program. What are the next steps for, community developers? How can people get involved? What is there still to do?
Yeah, good question. So although we can't build, smart contract applications on Ethereum 2 yet, there still is a lot to build around it. So prime example of someone building something really useful around F2 is the Bitfly team. So they made the Beacon Chain block explorer. So it's Beacon Chain. The URL is Beacon Chain, but there's a dot just before the IN at the end. So BEACONCHA.IN. They made a block explorer.
Beaconcha.in.
Yeah, that's right. It reads really well, doesn't pronounce so well. But so they built a block explorer. They took some of the F2 clients and built a block explorer around it. Incredibly helpful, incredibly useful to people like me who just want to use their phone to check on how their validator or the network is going without having to log into our fancy monitoring. So that's an example of things that you can build around F2 now. There's still a lot of green fields to be had around there. There's the Ethereum Foundation generally have at least one, generally more, grant programs, grant topics running. So I know they had, security style grants. So if you can come up with stuff that is like security focused on helping to perhaps trying to find interesting and new attacks on Ethereum too, then they'll fund you. There was also one about data collection. So if you can collect data about Ethereum too, the staking side of it, and produce novel, interesting results, then they'll also fund you for that. So these are places that developers can get involved to assist. They can always jump into the clients themselves, like SigP Lighthouse repo. You can come and contribute to that. I would say, any contribution is great and it's better than nothing. I personally would probably love to see people unless they're already an expert in, like the language that the client's written in and that type of systems programming. If they're an expert in that, they should probably jump in and help in like the real low level stuff. But if you're like a web developer or someone at that kind of more application level, then trying to build interesting web applications, like even things like a Twitter bot when someone gets slashed to make a tweet, lots of little things like this that are still missing from a new protocol. They can be super helpful. And then in terms of people, sorry.
I was gonna say, and in time, CryptoKitties.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Once we do phase 1, CryptoKitties 2.0. Yeah. And then people who are maybe not so technical, they can, like community people can always, organize events, help people be educated. Just your average person, if you're interested in participating in F2, like, running a node or understanding how the validators work, writing a blog post and then sharing that around is really helpful. There's one person called Summer Est is their tag. They've made a bunch of validator guides for Ethereum. And there's just like, a bunch of Medium posts. And that's incredibly useful for us because it saves people from coming asking us questions. And we're not always the best at writing user level documentation because there's a lot of things that we know that we take for granted. So yeah, anyone who wants to get involved and write about and educate is really, really helpful at this point too.
That's interesting. You just mentioned you can run a node. I assume that's the node that's not a validator node. What difference? What types of nodes there are, and what's the difference? And why is it important for people to run a node even if they're not processing transactions?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So broadly, there's 2 different types of F2 nodes. There's a validating F2 node, and then there's a actually let me start this again. So let me try this again. So there's 2 software components in F2. There is a beacon node and there's a validator client. So now a beacon node is very much like Bitcoin Core or Geth or Parity or Nevermind. It's a piece of software that runs on your computer. It takes up a decent chunk of resources, has a big database. It connects to all the peers in the network, listens to the network, accepts the blocks, verifies the signatures, verifies everything is okay. Then it stores a database, and then it gives you an API so that MetaMask or you with a web app can connect to it and query the state of the blockchain. So that's called the beacon node in F2. So this is just a component, sits and listens to the internet. It doesn't store validator keys or have anything to do with validators apart from listening to the network. Then the second component is the validator client. So the validator client is much, much smaller, and a validator client must have a beacon node. Now, a validator client is the component which holds the keys, your secret keys that I mentioned before that you deposited with. And then what it does is it talks to the beacon node, understands when it's due to produce blocks or when it's due to produce votes for blocks. Then it sends them to the beacon node. It does all the heavy lifting and verifying and creating things, sends it back. The validator client signs it, pushes it back, and then the beacon node pushes it out on the network. So if you are a validator, you need to run a beacon node and you need to run a validator client. If you are not a validator, if you just want to perhaps just run a node for the sake of it, and I'll explain why you might do that in a second, or if you want to build a data collection service, you don't need to have a validator. You can just run a beacon node, and then you can connect with, there's like a HTTP RESTful API, you can connect to it and consume it. So that's the answer of, I guess, the 2 different types of nodes on the Ethereum network. And then the reasons why would you run a non-validating node? This is, it's true for why it's true for many blockchains. It just helps to have, assuming that you're an honest person, you're a good person, you run the code as it's supposed to be, and you don't hack it to be nefarious. If there's more good nodes in the network than there are bad nodes, it's much easier for all of the nodes to find out what the truth is. So if only bad people run nodes, it would take us a very, very long time to filter through all the junk and reject kick all the bad nodes, find the good nodes and connect to them. But if you're running a node and it's there, what it'll do is it'll download blocks off the internet, and then it'll serve them back to other peers. It's a little bit like BitTorrent, I guess. If you're a BitTorrenter back there, you'd be like, why would you run a BitTorrent thing? And you go, well, because it helps other people who want to run them as well. And I believe in the protocol, so that's why you do it if you weren't validating.
Because the more people there are in the network, the stronger the network is, pretty much.
Exactly right.
Oh, here comes another question from Mr. Cherry Sunburst. Thank you so much for all the questions. Is that beacon/validator architecture just for Lighthouse or for all F2 clients?
Excellent question. 10 out of 10. It is true for Lighthouse. It's true for Prism. I think it's not necessarily true for Nimbus. I think that I don't know if they have an option to have them split, but they at least can package them into one. I think you can split them apart if you want, but generally they're packaged into the one thing. And Teku, I believe that they're fundamentally separate things, but there might be some way that you can run them together as well. So I guess Lighthouse, Prism, they're separate components always. Nimbus and Teku, they can be joined if you want.
Perfect. Follow-up question. If a validator holds the keys, does that mean you can't run a listener validator client without an asset deposit?
You can actually. You could just run a validator client. It won't do much at all. It'll just sit there and it'll be like, oh, do I have to do any duties? Oh no, I don't have to do any duties. I'll go back to sleep. And it'll just kind of do that. So it won't be super useful. You can run because what you do is like you generate your BLS key pairs, your validating key pairs, and then you make your deposit and submit them together. You can start your validator running before you've submitted your deposit, and it'll just sit there and wait until it becomes active. If that's how you want to do it. But yeah, you can. There's nothing stopping anyone from running a validator client if they want.
Okay, one question that just came to mind. What happens to people that just, they have F tokens, they just are holding them because they made an investment, it's a store of value, yeah.
Lost you, Adriana. I'm not sure if the problem is with me or whether it's on your end. It's hard to know with these, isn't it? I'm going to check my internet. I can still get pictures of cats when I search for them, so I think that my internet is all right. I might try logging out and logging back in again. Stay with us, YouTube. Oh, Adriana's out. It's just me. All right. Well, I assume Adriana will come back soon. What can I talk about in the meantime? I can talk about Lighthouse documentation. Let's do that. Let's talk about how to run your own F2 validator. Okay, so what you want to do, so you have 32F, you want to start validating. Oh, 1 second, I just got a message. I'm going to drop back to it. All right, Adriana crashed. Thank you, Sam, for letting me know. All right, we're going to go with my off the cuff, how to run an F2 validator. So if you want to run an F2 validator, the first thing you want to understand, we have Adriana back.
We are experiencing technical difficulties.
Hey.
Hey, we're back.
You just interrupted my own show that I was starting.
Look at that. I don't know. I lost Wi-Fi connection and everything went boom, boom. I'm glad it says here we're back live. So guys, hope we are back live. Sorry about the interruption. You know how it is, internet in Australia. That's bad. I think I read a report that we are like after a lot of African countries in terms of how bad our internet is.
Yeah, you probably had a koala chew through your lines or something.
That it must be. It definitely chewed some brains in Canberra, back in the day. Okay, the question that I was asking was people who are holding F for a store of value purpose, when do they have to worry about, or if they have to worry about going on the new chain?
Not yet is the right answer. So they don't need to be concerned about that yet. There's no clear date or time or path as to when it's going to happen. There's going to be people who are just holding it as a store of value. They probably they should definitely keep their ear out for changes, but I would suggest that they don't actually need to do anything. So say that my goal was to buy ETH today and then hold it until 2030, right? They were my two goals. I would say that I could probably just buy my ETH now, keep the public and private key, like back up my mnemonic, put on a Trezor or whatever, put it away, and then when it comes to 2030, I can just log in, and then I'm going to have to learn how F2 works and how to withdraw that money from there. I would be very surprised if there was some transition process needed for each user, and if that transition process wasn't done by this date, then it would all be lost. I would be very surprised if that was even suggested, and if it was, I would be against it. So yeah, I think the average user for now, they don't really need to be too concerned about it. But they should keep their eye out, maybe subscribe to the Ethereum Foundation on Twitter and a couple of people, maybe even people like myself, and then keep an eye out, keep an ear out, and see what you need to do. But I don't think there's going to be like a cutoff date or anything like that.
I think that puts a lot of people's minds at ease.
Yeah, good.
Because that's true for ETH, but also for tokens that live inside the smart contracts, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think what will probably happen is that there's a few ways of dealing with it now. So now you have Geth, which is I think it's the most used F2 client. As far as a user concerned, or something like MetaMask is concerned, it's just some APIs. It's like a program that exposes APIs and tells them what's going on in the blockchain. It just happens that on the other side of that is the peer-to-peer network and all of this stuff going on. But what can be done is that we could take Geth, for instance, we could keep the API side of it, the stuff that MetaMask and all these programs existingly they already talk to. We could keep that, and then we can chop off the bit where it talks on the network and has miners and all this kind of stuff. And then instead we can kind of drop in a connection to an F2 node. So then we'd have another component introduced, which would be kind of a re-engineered F1 client that is built for F2. So that would make kind of another third. There'd be Validator Client, Beacon node, then like an execution engine side of thing. Whether or not we join them together in the same thing is another question. But yeah, so that might even be the case where what we'll be doing is like F1 will be going along, and then it'll be like well known, at some point Geth is going to stop working in the way that it used to work, where it connects to peer-to-peer network. Instead, it's just going to flop straight over to the Beacon chain, and then that's where all the transactions come through, and that's where we decide on the future of the chain. So that'll be like a real smooth transition like that. And at that point, all of the existing smart contract balances, all of their functions, everything about it would be exactly the same. You'd just be like almost like turning off one server, pulling out the hard drive, putting it into another one and turning it on. There'll be a little bit dead downtime in the middle, but it's all the same over there as it was over there.
I think if that wasn't the case, it would never be a success.
I know. I for one would not like to be involved in replacing all of those APIs. That would be extremely painful and unpleasant. So I wouldn't vote for that.
And it would also, I think, generate too much anxiety for everybody who have, in fact, like been running businesses on Ethereum, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's no need for that kind of disruption. No one has any fun in doing that. The researchers, developers, no one.
That's good to hear. All right. I think we don't have any further questions from the crowd. So thank you so much for your time today. No
worries. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoy, the next year of new things.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Hopefully this thing will be implemented in 2021. If not, 2022. Why not?
We're working on it.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. Give my regards to the whole team.
Will do. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks everyone for watching. Hope you had some of your questions answered today. If you have more questions, I am going to add some means for you to contact the Sigma Prime team below. And as Paul mentioned, join the Discord channels, talk to the Ethereum Foundation guys. The good part about this is that it's truly a community, and everybody needs to get involved, and there's always channels to talk to someone. Thank you. Have a wonderful end of year, and I will see you guys next year. Bye.